I'm going to show you today a recipe, a concept that I've used for a sketch like this one. It came from a photograph from here, which is from a trip that I made to Taiwan in 2019. Let's go. I don't have the video of me sketching this sketch, so in this tutorial I'm just gonna redo it, but I'm gonna simplify it so down to its essence, and then you can really appreciate what I'm trying to say. The recipe is what I call purple opaque recipe, and let me explain what I mean by purple opaque. So let's go with a very simplified demo or a sketch. Couple of figures and then some buildings on the left and on the right, and it is quite usual. You find this sort of urban sketching scenario pretty commonplace. You can find it in most places, and I'm assuming that there's a lot of shade, not all of them shaded, but let's just assume 3/4 of these are in shades, either covered by high rise or for some reason backlit, and the buildings are in the shadow. So the purple opaque recipe basically use purple to represent the entire piece that is in the shadow or in the shade. The bigger piece it is, or rather the more connected and one piece it is, the better it is. So you connect the shadows, you connect the building, you connect some part of the figures that may be in the shade, and you leave figures that are out in the open or sunlit, and alone, that is, and not put it in with purple. And basically you now have a one piece purple or one piece shade, if you like. And then you apply opaque. I have the opaque yellow, and I'm going to put in some opaque orange as well, just basically as a contrast between the shade and the opaques. And the other semi-opaque, if you like, is my cobalt, which is the other sort of opaque color that I'm going to drop in to illustrate, or the contrast between opaque and purple, if you like. So a couple of dots of cobalt, right? So yellow, orange, blue, they are sort of opaque, and then against the purple shade. Okay, let me explain it even further by simplifying even further. So you now have a piece of a piece of purple, which is in the shade, representing shadows and areas that are not lit by sun. And then for contrast, you drop in not into the shade, but rather next to it or very close to it, a few opaque drops like yellow, orange, and here cobalt blue. Cobalt blue is not quite opaque, it's semi-opaque when it's used with a lot of pigment. So now you see that it is a very beautiful color scheme or color combination, and actually there's a reason why this recipe is simple to use and effective, and it makes a very pleasant sketch. And honestly, any beginners can get into this recipe very simply. Now if you look at the shapes that I made up front, they are all in the shade. I call it the piece of shade, and that's in purple. And then the opaques are sort of to create a contrast against that big blob of shade, if you like. And in the same way, this is really a color scheme. Okay, without further ado, let's get into a demo. I'm gonna draw or redraw the scene. I'm just gonna speed up and not being too careful, but just gonna illustrate the sketch. So I'll put down some of the figures, and then buildings on the left and right, some trees, some of the balloons, because this area of Taiwan is famous for letting balloon they are actually mini hot air balloon. They lit some form of candle, and the balloon will fly into the sky. You make a wish, you write some wish onto the balloon, and then it goes off. It's a wonderful sort of experience, and then I think for sustainability reason they will collect it when it lands somewhere on the other side of the hill. But anyway, I'm drawing very simply. and just to give you an illustration of this recipe. Sometimes we just overcomplicate our sketch really, and we make it so hard for ourselves because we want every single tiny details in it. But you know, occasionally, if you think about your sketch, what you're trying to do, you can simplify it and you can create symbols. In other words, symbol of trees, symbols of balloons, symbols of figures, and so on and so forth, without making it too complicated for yourself. I have a video on symbols. I'll put a link right up here for you. Go check it out if you're not seen it, because the real speedy sketches have lots of symbols in their database or storage, and they use it to simplify their sketch. Okay, I'm gonna exaggerate my coloring so that you understand the principle of this recipe. I'm gonna use a combination of French ultramarine with permanent alizarin crimson, both Daniel Smith colors. Mix them up into a purple shade, and I'm just gonna gusto it through in one piece into the left hand side of the buildings, and then across connected sort of a bridge into the right hand side of the shade as well. Some parts of the buildings on the right are not in the shade, but just to exaggerate the recipe, I'm just going to paint them all in shade, and the color scheme will carry itself in that sense. And you will see that the color scheme works because, you know, it is a beautiful color scheme, purple, yellow in essence, with a variation or twist if you like. But you know, in this case, I even shaded the figures in front, so your eyes will think of the figures in front as being in shadow. Okay, let me speed up the coloring here a little bit, and so that you know I can kind of create commentary for the rest of the sketch. So as you can see, I'm just gonna basically power on my combination of purple from the two colors I mentioned, French ultramarine, permanent alizarin crimson. And some spots I use more red, some spots I use more blue, just for variety. It's just really no magic to it. And then I'm just gonna power through the entire piece as if they are one piece of shade, as you can see. There's a slight variation of the purple just for interest, but there's really no other reason. Okay, so here comes the opaque. I'm gonna basically color the balloons in bright, opaque yellow, opaque orange, and semi-opaque blue. I don't have an opaque blue on my palette. I have cobalt, which is kind of semi-opaque, but you have to use a lot of the pigment, right? You will see that immediately your eyes will see that there is a shade and then there's a sunlit. The eyes will read the opaque as they are in sunlight, and then the rest of the shade, which is purple, as if they are under shadows and so on. Now, I'm going to be cheeky. I'm going to use the same sort of dots of yellow and orange and blue to dot the colors of the shirts of the various figures in the distance. Again, immediately your eyes will contrast the figures in front, which are in the shade, against the sunlit opaques that are in the distance, and it creates a sort of a clear reading of the mind as to which part of the figures, or which figures are under some sort of shade and shadow, and those that are in the sunlight. Okay, the next bit, I'm just being carefully, just painting or coloring the trees. I'm not being really careful really. It's a muted tree, muted green if you like. One part with a bit of green that is being toned down with brown, and then another one that's being muted slightly with its complementary, which is red. So I used a bit of green and then I dropped in a bit of a complementary to mute it down. Then the Taiwanese flag, which is really red, and then there's a blue, sort of a top part of it. I'm not going to be very precise, but that's sort of how it looks like when it's slightly folded. And I'm going to go in and sort of fill in more shade because of the distance building. I also want to make sure that it's part of that one big blob of purple, if you like, but it's in a slightly different mix, so your eyes will see that they are actually different shapes or different buildings, if you like. Put a bit more darker purple for backs, for hair, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, your eyes were beginning to read what's in the shade and what's in the sunlight. That's really the whole idea of this recipe. Okay, I'm going to switch over to my original sketch where I use this formula. And you see, of course, it's done with a lot more finesse and a lot more care, where actually I didn't put the entire shade of the front figures and I didn't put the entire shades on all the buildings on the left, but I carefully put in a little bit more of the shaded area and, you know, differentiated between the lit part and non. But the idea is still the same, basically. You see that I've put the purple, well, as best I can in one piece, littered with lots of opaque all around. Now, I wish you will go try this recipe and tell me in the commentary below whether it works for you and whether you have a problem using it. I'll be happy to help in some ways or other. Right? Meanwhile, stay safe wherever you are. Take care. Bye.